Juggling motherhood and modern day life can be stressful and relentless, but it doesn't need to be this way. The Joy of Being podcast is the answer to maternal mental health, bringing sustainable relief and calm to hardworking mums everywhere so that you, your family and work can thrive. My name's Marina Pearson and I'm your host, transformational coach and mum who loves to interview business owners, transformational professionals and creatives to have insightful conversations about what it takes to really live a life that is thriving, fulfilling and full of joy. And today I've got some amazing news. You can now order your very own version of the Joy of Being book, supporting hardworking mums to stress less and live more. If you're the type of mum who is struggling with the burdens of motherhood or modern day life, then this will be a perfect book for you. If you're curious, you want to know more and you want to see what's up with that book, you can do so at www.marinapearson.com/order. So on today's show, I have decided to interview the beautiful Dave Elleray. Dave is one of the founders of freedomthinking.co.uk and was the first person in the UK to deliver the 3 principles in the UK prison system. He has worked with charities that help prison inmates find a constructive way forward and has worked with hospital staff, psychologists, school children and teachers in Nepal in the wake of the 2016 earthquakes. He has spoken to many organisations globally, from charities for physically injured refugees to eating disorder clinics, and he has spoken to a diverse range of communities in many countries. He speaks at conferences in the UK and abroad and works with people with severe mental health diagnosis through to people who are simply wishing to have a richer, fulfilling, connected experience of life. And I reached out to him because anger is one of those emotions that is quite a taboo subject, and one that I hadn't really sort of touched on in these last episodes. His story is really inspirational and brings to light how it's possible for us to go from being a very angry person to one that is full of love and peace. We explored this idea that anger is a bad feeling to have, and also explored his story around how he now experiences life versus how he used to. So if you are afraid of anger, if you are experiencing it from other people, if you have recognized that you have angry outbursts and you just want to hear a story of hope and how it's actually possible to shift and change this into something more constructive and generative, then this is going to be an amazing episode for you. Enjoy. So welcome everybody. On today's show, I have the beautiful Dave Elleray. Is that how I pronounce your surname? Hopefully, yes.
Nobody entirely knows, but it's a good effort, so that'll do, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I reached out to Jen, his partner, and we were talking, and she suggested I speak to Dave. And so I was like, okay, fine. I didn't know Dave at all. And then the topic of anger came about, and I was like, actually, that's a really great topic. It's a topic that I haven't really focused on during this podcast season. And so we thought we'd bring this into the fray and have a good old rummage and exploration around this subject. And I know that Dave has had some insight into anger and how it used to be and how it is for him today. So that's why I brought him onto the show, and I'm hoping that it'll be enlightening for everybody that listens to it. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Marina.
You're very welcome. So, Dave, how did it used to be for you? Because anger was pretty prominent in your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Anger was quite often my go-to emotion. When I was younger at school, I remember I was quite a bit of a late developer. I mean, at school, I would always look up to the bigger lads and want to be more like them. And I don't know, I think deeply ingrained into my belief system from quite a young age came this idea that I wanted to be hard, like one of the big boys. And I wasn't, until I was about 19. I was 6 foot tall and 11 stone. So I was very tall and thin. And probably till I was about 17, 18, I was very tall and thin. And I got quite heavily involved in drugs because, again, it's part of the hard lad scene and the bad lad scene. And just trying to fit in, I suppose, and trying to feel safe. When I reflect back now, it was a young man trying to feel safe in the world. And I always got the impression that the hard lads were safe because nobody would go near them. And so it wasn't long before I was hitting the gym, continuing with the drugs, failing college courses, ending up in prison for violence. Long story short, it was a tricky few years following my failing the college course, prison. A lot of drink, heavy times. I remember at the time thinking, I've just finished a 4-year college course. I've come out with absolutely nothing. The only person that came out of the course with nothing was myself, and it was ecology, something that I was really good at: plants and animals, wildlife, the environment. Something I was really good at, but yet I failed it because I got too heavily involved in drugs, and my time was preoccupied taking its source in it, and all the usual bullshit that goes along with it. So yeah, anger was a thing, like a bit of a go-to emotion, really, where I found, like, once I'd been to the gym a bit and I'd got myself a bit bigger, I got myself up to about 15 stone, and when I look back at photographs, I was built like a tank, but in my mind, I was still a very small man. Still, the bulk never overcame the fear. The thing that I thought would keep me safe was the building up of myself, the ability to intimidate people. And I thought that along with that would come safety and peace of mind. All along, all I was looking for was that. And it never came. It never came. So inevitably, I would find myself in scrapes and scraps every week, and wondered why I couldn't go out for a night out without getting into trouble, getting into fights and arguments and stuff. And yeah, again, long story short, ended up becoming a tree surgeon, which was something that I kind of fell into. It was a job that I looked around, and me being me at that age, at the age of 21, I was like, well, I want money. I want to be big. I want to look tough. I want to be manly. Chainsaws, climbing trees. I'll get you loads of women. It'll make you look attractive, and all this nonsense. Before I knew it, I was in the tree surgery game, and it was something that actually managed to get me off drugs, because I ended up working on the railway tracks. But all along, I kind of had this impending doom within my mind of, you are going back to prison, you're an angry man, you're a chronic depressive, a deeply unhappy man who had everything on the outside. I had my own home, my beautiful wife. I lived in the Lake District. I live in the Lake District, fit, strong. Had everything I needed, but within myself there was this dissatisfaction. And it was when I reached the age of, I think it was 32, when I started, 31, my apologies, when I started entering into a real sense of depression. And this was something that really took me down, and I started planning suicide, and was drinking an awful lot. I ended up splitting with my wife. I quit my tree surgery business, which I was self-employed at for a lot of years. I sacked that off, and I ended up going to live on my own. I met another woman, and my life got really, really messy. And I was seeing therapists, and I was seeing psychologists, and they were all trying to dig in deep and figure out where Dave's gone wrong. Where was it Dave went wrong? And it's funny, and deep down within myself, I had this hope that they would find something that would help me. But also deep down within myself, I knew that it was a futile search. I don't know. It's just one of those things. where I just knew it was a futile search. And at the age of 33, thankfully, by what I can only describe as miracle, I was introduced to the principles. And the moment I heard it, I knew I was onto something, that what I was being introduced to was something that I could relate to. It was like, there was this, I remember the lady who introduced me to it was a lady called Sue Hugenson, one of my best friends to this day. And the moment she started to speak to me about it, I remember bursting into tears, and she said, "What are you crying for?" I said, "Because I know what you're speaking about." I said, "I think you're talking about God." I said, "Some people call it God." I said, "I call it nature." I said, "I know what you're talking about." And with that, she got me. She got me interested. It took me 9 weeks before I actually had gained insight into it, before I had a revelation that shattered my illusion of life, that completely transformed the world, transformed my world. And it was from that moment on that my life has never been the same. And so that's now what I've stopped doing tree work a few years ago now, and that's what I now dedicate my life to doing, is helping people find this within themselves, because it is in no other place. And this thing that everybody is searching for, the thing that will heal everything within a being, within the world, lies at the heart of our very being. And I look back at my life now, and I look back at the therapy that I underwent to try and help me overcome the anger. I mean, my anger was such that where I live in the Lake District, we have narrow lanes, and if people didn't wave to me to say thank you as they passed, I'd have my van ready in reverse, and I would reverse off, and I'd block them off. And then I'd get out of my car, and I'd open up their door, and I'd grab them, and I would lean in their car, and I would threaten them and scream at them, "Where's your effing manners?" Only to go back into my own car and burst into tears, because I knew this wasn't the way to live life. I knew there was something fundamentally amiss with Dave. And it was something I was terrified of. I mean, I remember sitting on a psychologist's sofa and saying, "I am the scariest human being I've ever met. And I cannot leave me. I will not. I can't step away from myself. I can't leave me anywhere. I am unpredictable. I am violent. I'm violent to other people. I'm violent to myself. I'm aggressive. I'm quick to temper." I was a nightmare.
And I can imagine that with all of that. No. It's not like I can imagine that. It's more like I can imagine that knowing that and understanding that there must have been so much shame and blame, and even like on top of all of the anger that you were feeling was this anger towards yourself. Yeah. And all of that like judgment around what a shitty ass person I am. And, you know, as you were saying, I'm assuming, did that sort of occur as well?
Probably, yeah. I mean, guilt was something I carried an awful lot. I lived in the emotional darkness of the spectrum of reality. Really, it was I carried shame, guilt, hatred, judgment. I was judgmental of other cultures. I was judgmental of everybody. I was judgmental of myself. I was a pretty lost boy. I was a pretty lost fella. Not somebody who I look back and I have no. It's bizarre when I look back. There is no connection to that expression of thought in that moment, or that being that. There's no connection to it. It doesn't exist. It's just a complete. I have no connection to it. It's such a bizarre thing.
Wow. Yeah, I get it. Like, I used to take drugs, and drink a lot and all sorts of other weird and wonderful things that I used to experience. And there's it's like, who was that person? Have no idea. But I also understand the experience of why people do what they do when it comes to those sorts of behaviors. How did it affect your relationships?
I can't imagine I was much fun to be around. I remember one of my hockey friends saying to me, I was wanting you to be godfather to my child. He said, but you're too unpredictable. He said, but deep down within you, Dave, I know there's a good man. And I think that pretty much summed me up, that little statement after a game of hockey, sat around having a beer with the lads. Like, I think deep down with everybody, there's beauty. And I knew it was there within me, it just wouldn't show itself. My family, we were forever in arguments. Myself and my wife at the time, Rach, we didn't really argue, actually. Rach was about the only person that I could kind of be around and not argue with. We argued very little, but when it came to anybody else, it's on. But yeah, my family, like people around me, strangers. Yeah.
And I guess there's an element of anger that we all experience, right? I mean, it's part of. That's actually an interesting question, or at least I think it's an interesting question. So I'm not going to say everybody else is interesting, but in terms of the human range of emotions that we have, I mean, sadness, anger, shame, blame, guilt. I mean, they're all part of being human and experiencing that on just having those feelings, right? And because often we want to make those feelings wrong. And I'm curious about that. Like, what's your take on it? So, yes, you were living most of your time in that space of anger. But I live in a culture in Spain where anger, there's nothing wrong with having anger here in this country. Everybody's got some. Yeah. And I don't even know and it's funny because on a cultural take as a Brit, what I deem as being angry, they deem as being passionate, right? So I'm curious about that. I'm curious about how we then interpret those feelings that we have and blame and want to get rid of them. And anyway, I just wanted to ask you around that.
There's never been a time when I have experienced any form of fear-based emotion when I haven't had something to blame it on. Mm. So when I'm talking about that, I mean, I'll take a couple of steps before I just want to come back a little bit and just talk a bit about what it was that kind of helped me see life different. And it was listening to Sue and Sydney Banks. I'm sure listeners are familiar with Sydney Banks. It was when I listened to Sid one day and I listened to him talk about thought and consciousness, mind, and I went for a walk. I wasn't planning on any of this. At this point, actually, I was planning on topping myself. I was going back on antidepressants. I've been listening to Sue for a few weeks and it's not working, Sue.
So as I was saying, in terms of, we tend to want to judge feelings like anger and blame and guilt and violence. We tend to want to judge those feelings, but yet at the same time, they're part of the human spectrum, right, of feelings that we have. So I know that from what I've understood so far is that, we can have feelings on both ends of the spectrum of outside in when we blame something, or in the inside out when you're just feeling angry for no reason. You're just feeling angry, or you're just feeling guilt for no reason. You're just feeling. But I'd love your take on this in terms of what your thoughts are around it, because, of course, I live in a country where anger is rife in terms of like how they express themselves. I live in Spain, so to them it's just like, oh well, yeah, it's done. Like they just get hot-headed, it's done, move on. There's really no big deal about it. And so for me, coming from an English culture, and I'm currently in a partnership with a Spanish man, to me it feels like I'm being right attacked. And he's just like expressing his passion. And I'm like, no, I felt really attacked. You attacked me. Because where I come from, you don't talk to people like this. So I'm just curious, what's your take on that?
I do know my life is considerably nicer without anger being the prime prominent emotion.
Cool.
To emotion. I do know my life is a lot nicer. I also know my life got a lot simpler. I know that, I'm thankful not to experience anger like what I used to. I'm not saying I don't experience the emotion, but yeah, it's such an interesting thing now. I mean, to myself, before I woke up, I call it an awakening, a wake up, or whatever you want to call it, because I used to describe it as my birthday. For a while afterwards, I used to describe it as my birthday, the day I started to truly live, the day I was 33, the day I actually felt like I woke up to life and I got filled with love and understanding and knowledge that I'm eternally thankful for. And this was the thing that kind of took away, neutralized or disposed of the old Dave. When I woke up to that, it was like I could see clearly. I got to see clearly the nature of life. I got to see clearly the nature of reality. It was there you go, there it is. And after that, it became really obvious that all the kind of negative fear-based emotions, your jealousy, your anger, your guilt, your whatever, depression, anxiety, worry, all these kind of what people would label as being negative and the things that everybody are terrified of are emotions based in the idea of an external reality and time. So worry, anxiety, they're always a future-based thing. They're always based in this notion that somewhere on the planet, somewhere in existence is a future. And it's like guilt and all that kind of stuff are all kind of based in the idea that there is a past. Somehow holding the power over this being's experience. So I don't ever get angry with people when they weren't doing what I thought they should, or get angry with a scenario when it wasn't going like how I thought it should. And then I'd get angry. It was always a victim mentality.
It's exhausting.
Oh, it's exhausting. Yeah, I mean, it got to the point for myself where I started getting like Tourette's-like symptoms, physical tics, facial tics. My outbursts of language were entertaining to my friends, catastrophic for me. But yeah, it was always based in this idea of an external reality, as though there was something I was experiencing outside of consciousness. But seeing this moment of internalized, I can't find words to describe it. But that moment of insight, of revelation, it flipped the world on its head. And I remember I was so afraid of the world. I was so afraid of life. I mean, this is why I was a hard man. I was a hard man, not because I was confident. These lads that were walking around being big, tough, going to the gym, overconfident, overzealous, hard men, they weren't tough within. I see that now. I've been into prison speaking numerous times, and I speak to prisoners about this. I've spent time in prison myself, and I've spent time with hard men. I always used to think you were safe if you were hard, but no, you are. If you need to be hard, you are scared. And so it was seeing this kind of, I could only, the overriding emotion in this moment was love. It was this pure, unconditional love and excitement for life itself, and it was something I was terrified of to begin with. After for the following few days, I was like, "What the fuck's this? What's this? I've never experienced this." So there was this kind of partial excitement, and there was this deep knowing, and I think I was more scared it was going to leave. Which inevitably that experience does. Many people come across this and they have this massive shift in awareness and their lives change and they walk around in a bubble of love and they're so afraid of it to go on. But that's when you really start to kind of grow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's then that you start to become curious about life. You start to see with a bigger picture. You start to. I often I've got a drone and a bit of a geek, but I like if I hover my drone 6 inches off the ground, that's where I used to live. Narrow-minded, short-visioned, short-fused. But when I take my drone up to legally I can only take it to 120 meters or 120 meters, you get a far bigger picture. And you start to find yourself in that greater picture of life, in that greater awareness, and before you know it, you find that all these emotions that you kind of were so afraid of kind of take a bit of a back seat, and you start to find more awe for life, more inspiration, more gratitude, more love, understanding, and you start to get a sense of what it is to feel. When you start to wake up to the nature of what life truly is, you start to get this realization that it is a singular thing. That I often quite liken it to a spring. We have this spring high on a mountainside, and bubbling out of the ground comes this spring. Now, this spring is, Jenny went, I don't like this metaphor. My sister was like, I love this metaphor, so I'll just say it anyway. But where I live in the Lake District, there's 3 bodies of water: Buttermilk, Crummock Water, and Loweswater. And people go and visit these lakes. But these lakes are like events along the river, because each lake is connected by a river. And along this river, you've got waterfalls, you've got rapids, you've got big, still, calm patches, glades of water, and you've got ripples, you've got eddies, and you've got these lakes, and everybody goes and visits the events. They go, let's go and see the waterfall, let's go and see the lake, let's go and see this lake, let's go to Crummock Water now. And people go and visit the lakes, and they go and visit the events, and they marvel at the events, the lakes, the waterfalls, the kind of characteristics, the expressions of the water. And we go and we name them and we separate them and we create everything as separate. Oh, it's Loweswater, that's Crummock Water, that's Buttermilk. And they're labelled different on maps, and everybody has their favourite. Oh, I really love Buttermilk because it's got the backdrop of haystacks and all that kind of stuff. It's got the pine trees on it. I love that. Loweswater is probably my least favourite. So you've got these events where people kind of go along and go, oh, yeah, I love that one. I don't like that. That's all right. But all along, it was all created from a spring on the side of haystacks. There's a spring on the side of haystacks from which all these events are born. Each lake is simply a pooling of the water that is born on the side of haystacks. And I liken all experience to be like that. It's like from within ourselves is like this spring from which all events that we experience take place. And I'm not saying things don't exist in the world, but the expression of it that we get to encounter as our life, as our being, our feeling states, as our reality, is all born from the same spring, consciousness. This consciousness state that is all things, that is immeasurable by science. So it's been overlooked. It's been ignored by science as consciousness. It's never been a studyable science. It never will be a studyable science. And so we go and search and we go and examine the events. When we start to recognize that all experience is simply born from the same place, you start to recognize that any kind of form of labeling it of being negative or positive is a duality. And in that singular birthplace, there is no duality, because you cannot have duality 2 or more in one. And so when people start to wake up to this within themselves, and they start to wake up and they realize that everything is a singular event, And it is within ourselves that this is taking place. It's within everything that it's taking place, everything. And one of the things that hit me the hardest on that day, the thing that kind of was the catalyst to seeing what I got to recognize in that moment, was I saw a jackdaw, crow, and it looked at me. And it was in that moment where my life just, this event took place. But on reflection, I could describe it as being the realization that the jackdaw was a conscious state that thinks. And it was in that the principles kind of came alive. Point of the principles came alive when I realized that this is a far bigger thing than trying to fix ourselves, because there is nothing to fix. There is just the illusion of broken. And so all the attempts to try and fix myself, try and fix my anger, had been literally like placing logs on a fire that I was trying to extinguish. And this fire turned into a bonfire. And this I became so afraid of this fire. But it was only when I had that realization into the nature of creation. What is creation? All creation is an illusion. All things are a vibration of what people call and what science calls energy. We go, I understand that. Right? So everything's energy. But what is energy? We start to wake up and we realize that everything's a divine mystery. That when people wake up to this within themselves, they realize that they can't know it with the intellect, because the intellect is pure creation. But what we're talking about here is creator. Creation can never see creator. Creation is always going to be a subjective, singular point, but the creator is the creator of all. And so this is the thing where I find, like, if people really want to start to find freedom in life, they need to stop looking at their problems as problems. Because the problem isn't the problem, the thing that we're trying to overcome. I was always trying to overcome anger. That was never the problem. My problem was I was fast asleep. I had so little regard for the magic of life. I had never questioned life. One of the first things I like to ask people who come and work with Jenny and I is, what's life? What is it to be alive? What is this existence stuff? Human beings didn't invent human beings. Human beings didn't invent consciousness. Human beings did not invent thought. What is it to be alive? And quite often, every single time, actually, I've had the response, I don't know. And I find that such an interesting thing, that in this space of I don't know, we think we know something about life itself. We think we know who we are. We think we know what is right, what is wrong, all this stuff. And all this stuff is the stuff that gets us into trouble. It's called the belief system. It's called the intellect. It's called the ego. And so in Buddhism and in Hinduism, I know that they say that in order to find peace, you must go within and you must see past the ego. So people then set off on this mad rampage to try and see past the ego. But what's trying to see past the ego? It's ego. So there you go. You've got the intellect trying to see past itself. You've got the belief system believing it needs to see past itself. Yet another belief. You've got ego trying to see past ego, and it never works. But all along, that was always the illusion that I suffered, was this illusion of ego. And it is the only thing that caused suffering in anybody's life. And it can seem like quite a bitter pill to swallow, can't it?
Recently, when you were saying about the problems, the interesting question is to understand what even creates the capacity for us to even be aware that there is a problem, and where we think the experience is actually really coming from. Because often we overlook, and that's all that's ever going on, is this: we just overlook where our experience is coming from.
It is a singular thing. It's like in this world, in our life, it gets so complex. You and I have been brought up in the Western world, which has got massive. I'll say it's got massive controlled religions that have kind of worked for a few. And in doing so, it's kind of taken away the magic of messages the messages have been removed, and what's been left is a system of the ability to control masses by kings over the years and And so in doing so, as we start to come into the 20th, 21st century, I can't remember, but I forget how it works. Always want 21st century now, aren't we? Yeah, I think we're a century ahead. I can't remember, but we know it doesn't sit right. This, and so naturally the churches are suffering the consequences of that now. But science has become the predominant God, and we've lived in this state of being where we measure, and as we measure, we create distance, which is a separation, which is an over here and an over there, which again we separate things. And in our scientific pursuits, we have categorized, named, separated. We have come to conclusions that we know something, and this to me has been useful on one hand in order to produce things in the world, but at the same time it's created separation, it's created confusion, and it's negated spirit. The very thing that observes the experiment within the scientist is a conscious state that thinks. And of course, the conscious state that thinks creates the reality that the scientist encounters. And so we now live in this state of almost stalemate, where we've come to this point where we go, Newton didn't have it. Newton had certain kind of things where he understood stuff, and we've got to this kind of stalemate because science en masse is rebelling against spirit, is rebelling against God. And I often say, like, all science is a study of God. That's the only thing that can ever be studied is this creative source. And so until we bring back into our conversation and start to get interested in what is this source, it'll be something that can never be studied, because the only thing we can ever study is creation, which is why psychologists study thoughts, which is why psychologists study feelings, which is why psychologists study experiences. But these are all creations. So in the same way as a scientist who is studying the world can never have a full picture until they bring into their awareness or bring into the conversation the power that creates, neither can psychology. And I feel like this is where Sid's message really has this transformational thing that it has to offer, is because all of a sudden you stop looking at what is created and you start becoming curious in what's creating. And you get back to the spring, you get back to the ground zero, because, like you were just saying, as you find that, you find that there is ultimately nothing to fear in life. There is ultimately nothing to fear. Everything that is created is all born of one thing. It just creates the illusion of separation. It creates the illusion of self. It creates the illusion of ego. It creates the illusion of somebody to suffer. And this is the power of thought, belief system, intellect. And so this is I remember speaking to Jenny not so long ago, and I was like, what was it that really hit you when you woke up? She said, what really hit me when I woke up was there was nothing to fear. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what I experienced. There was nothing in this lifetime to fear. It's all a play of consciousness. And the thing is, if you look at the world, we've got angry people in power in a lot of countries, do you know what I mean? But what are these angry people? They're fearful, scared human beings who are desperate to try and be somewhere. They're desperate to try and do something. And it's all built from lack of peace of mind. It's all built from fear. And so as a consequence of that, we face a world where, well, Jenny and I have been asked to go and do some work out in the Congo to work with tribal and religious leaders to try and bring them round to have a sit down, have a conversation, and have a conversation about the nature of life. So we can start to realize that the only thing that creates the illusion of an enemy is a thought. No enemy exists in the world without thought being the creative source of the illusion of an enemy. And so we've been asked to go out and have a conversation around that. And we've spoken in many parts of the world. I remember we went to a soup kitchen in South Africa where there was 300 homeless people. And our friend, as we left, our friend burst into tears. She's a very rich Jewish lady in South Africa. And a friend burst into tears and she said, the problem's too big. I said, what do you mean the problem's too big? She said, look, there's 300 people here. She said, it's scratching it's just the tip of the iceberg of the homelessness in Cape Town. We said, no, the problem isn't too big. The problem's really small. The problem's so simple. I said, yeah, it looks difficult if we need to address economic bias, colour bias, work, housing, all this stuff, land. Yeah, then it looks really complex. But if you take into consideration that the moment South Africans change their minds about one another, the moment South Africans are prepared to drop their beliefs about one another, their country will change. Your country will change. The only thing that holds your country of South Africa in a state of paralysis as it sits right now and these problems is because of the belief system people carry around. So when people's thinking changes, so will the country of South Africa. And this is the same for not just countries, but it's the same for us. If we are prepared to look in this direction and consider, what is it? What is life? What is this? It's a deep question. What is this life? When we stop hovering the drone 6 inches off the ground and focusing on all the problems and start to come up and take a look with a bigger picture, what is going on? What is truly going on here? When we start to wake up to it's all a divine mystery. Nobody can explain how things come into being, because the moment we try and explain it, we're in creation. To thought, we're in the intellect. Nobody can explain it, but what we have is this divine going on that looks like we know something about it. And it's in that all our troubles start. The moment we think we know something, I'm this kind of person, they're that kind of person. I know that was the thing that crippled my life for so many years. But I know that freedom came the moment I realized it was all an illusion.
Thank you for that, Dave. I can really resonate with what you've just said, and I was just thinking about an insight I had a couple of days ago, which has made such a profound difference to me already, where anger's been a big topic for me in my life, and especially around people who have been angry.
Have been what, sort of?
Who have been angry or directed their anger towards me.
Yeah.
And I've always felt a victim of it, afraid of it, something I don't want to be around or can't deal with. And massive fear, actually. And suddenly, the other day, I realised that I've never really actually been a victim to it. I've only ever... The story is what I've been a victim to. That's been huge for me to see. And I'm like, they can just deal with their life in the way that they want to, but it's got nothing to do with me, and the way I feel has got nothing to do with what they're experiencing either. So thank God for that. Amen.
Absolutely, lovely. When you see this within yourself, you see it within others. And it's like, well, that has to be the ground zero for acceptance, for forgiveness.
Well, what I saw is actually there's nothing to forgive. There's actually nothing to forgive. There's just experience in the moment.
So we had, you're exactly right. We had this young lady who worked with us in South Africa, in the township just outside of Kailicha, and she'd had a mobile phone stolen by a neighbour who'd come round, and she'd come into a house, she'd taken a mobile phone, and this young girl, she went down there. I loved this girl. She was properly cool. And we sat down the first day of our training, and she just looked like she wanted to kill us. I can only say that. She looked really frigging pissed off. Why am I here? Why am I here? But she said she came back the next day and were like, has anybody had any insights? And the mates were nudging her. Say it. And she's like, no, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it. I said, right. I said, you don't have to say it from the group. I said, but you do have to say it. You have to tell me at lunchtime. And I remember this. I took this girl to one side and I said, what was it? She said, well, a few days ago, she said, my neighbour came around. She came into my house and she stole my phone. She said, I know where I left my phone. It was in the kitchen. And she said, when she left, the phone had gone. She said, so I stormed down her house and I banged on the door and I walked in, she said, and I pushed her and I shouted at her husband who came through, and I was pushing him. She said, I was pushing him. I was calling him all the names under the sun. She said, I wanted him to beat me. She said, I wanted him to beat me so badly I could go to the police and they would take this seriously. And she said, and I stormed through into the sitting room where her brother was fixing my phone. She said, my phone wasn't broken. And she said, I was so angry. She said, and I stormed out the house. And she said, and that was a few days ago. She said, and I came to your training yesterday. She said, it made no sense. She said, it made no sense at all. And she said, but I went home last night. She said, and I sat down, and she said, I felt different. And she said, I got up and I walked down to my neighbour's house and I knocked on the door, and she said, the lady answered and she said, I apologised. She said, I'm sorry for shouting at you. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. And she said, with that, her husband came through. And she said, I apologised to him. She said, I'm sorry for calling you those names and pushing you. She said, I should not have done that. She said, we are neighbours. She said, you will need me and I will need you. And she said, but I will take my phone back now. And she said, they went and got her phone and they gave it to her. And she said, I will fix this. She said, I want to forget about this. And I'm looking at this girl. I said, wow. I said, so you forgave somebody who stole your mobile phone? I said, do you not feel like you mugged yourself? And she said, no, not at all. She said, I feel like the weight of the world has come off my shoulders. Ooh. And then I walked outside and Jenny was sat with a lady called Jill who we stopped with out in South Africa. And this other lady who'd been on one of our trainings came walking towards us, and she was crying her eyes out, bawling with tears. And I really like this lady. And she said, I said, are you all right? And she said, no. She said, I'm not. I said, what's wrong? And she said, I've just found out my brother-in-law's been shot dead. I said, what's happened? She said, well, he's a taxi driver. He pulled up at the wrong taxi rank. Somebody put a gun through the window and shot him. And it was then that I got reflective about this girl, and it was like, that single act of understanding, of kindness, of forgiveness in the township, that girl she's killed that scenario dead. There are no repercussions from that. There is no needing to sleep with a knife or a gun underneath a pillow. There's no worry about, are they going to come and burn down my house? Kailicha is one of the murder capitals of the world. Life is cheap out there, and she doesn't have to dream up ideas of revenge and live in the experience of hatred. She set herself free. She set herself free within her own mind, and it all came via understanding. Now, she says it made no sense, but this doesn't make sense to the intellect.
No, it doesn't.
This is the thing everybody's trying to do. They're trying to make sense of this with the intellect. Forget it. It's the intellect that gets in the way. Mm. It's the intellect that creates the idea that we're not already it. It's the intellect that creates all the illusions of what we think we are, what we think this is, what we think we need to know. And that's the thing that gets in the way. This isn't an intellectual process. This comes before the intellect, and it cannot be seen with the intellect. Therefore, you cannot think yourself there. Therefore, you cannot rationalize it. But it exists at the heart of everything, everybody. It creates the illusion of life. And when people start to wake up to it within themselves, they start to act they naturally find themselves, rather than being at the fear end of the spectrum where life is just terrible, they start to find themselves in the love end of the spectrum. And like I said earlier, there's never been a time I've experienced any form of fear when it hasn't been blamed on something. But I do experience love, which is unconditional, which is why people would say, well, God is love. What is God? Well, God is the creator. What is the creator of reality? Well, it's thought. Not what we think, but the power of thought. everybody fundamentally is God. That is the fundamental basis of everything. Is this what people call God? And God then comes with this massive label of a man or this, that. No, it's a noise. It's a word. It's a noise. It's a pointer. But everybody is source. Everybody is source of reality. Everybody is source of being. Everybody is source of life. That is what everybody fundamentally is. But as we think, as we go through life, we create concepts and ideas of what we think we are, what people tell us we are, which takes us away from being source. The illusion of takes us away from being source to the illusion of, oh, no, we're this. I'm this kind of person. I'm that kind of person. They're that type of person. But this is the illusion that the Buddhists and Jesus Christ try to help people see past. Wake up. Sid will say, wake up to your divinity. Wake up to this within yourself. You are it. Everybody's it. And when you see it, you will know.
Yeah, I had an experience of that when I was pregnant with my son. And I talk about it in my book, The Joy of Being. And I looked down on my belly and I was like, what's creating Leo inside of me? Because I ain't going about my day and doing whatever. And this little one growing inside of me. And I remember thinking, oh, he's God. And then my mind just went, oh, we're all God.
Yeah.
I was like, we're all born the same way. We're all created the same way. It's like, oh, wow, we're all one. Oh, wow, okay. It was like one thing after the other. It was kind of, bit of like a chain reaction.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really cool. That was really cool to see. I had to sit down for about 10 minutes, couldn't speak to anybody. I was like, wow. But yeah, it's really cool to see that we are that. So Dave, thank you so much for taking us from something so personal, from Dave Anger to God. It's all born from the same thing anyway.
It is.
So if somebody wants to get in contact with you or speak to you, reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm personally not on Facebook, but Freedom Thinking is, which is my partner Jenny and I. Freedom Thinking is on Facebook. Jenny Anderson's on Facebook. But you can contact us on info@freedomthinking.co.uk. We've got a website as well, which is www.freedomthinking.co.uk.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. It was wonderful to have you.
You're welcome. So nice to see you.
And for everybody that's been listening in, hopefully that you got as much out of it as I did. And until the next time, bye-bye for now.
And there we have it, another amazing episode of The Joy of Being. And if you would like a more personalized touch to live a stress-free life, then why not find out more about the Joy of Being retreat, an intimate 4-day profound experience at a luxury venue in Javier, Spain, where you get to experience your inner calm and peace of mind by slowing down and making space. To find out more, email me at marina@marinapearson.com with Joy of Being retreat in the title. If you loved what you heard here today and it's been helpful, why not subscribe or share the podcast with others? So until next week's episode, remember, you are the joy you seek.